It was a quiet morning on the ranch, just like any other. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the fields. The rancher, a man of few words and simple habits, was already up and busy with his usual chores. The day was calm, peaceful, and there was a slight chill in the air, signaling the beginning of the new season. He walked across the dirt path leading to the barn, where his alien maid worked diligently every morning. She had been with him for a long time, an odd but loyal companion from a faraway world. She was unlike anyone the rancher had ever met, with her blue skin, sharp features, and strange mannerisms. Yet, over time, they had formed a bond, one built on mutual respect and quiet understanding. As he reached the barn, something caught his eye. There, standing by the door of the kitchen, was his maid. But something was wrong. She wasn't moving like she usually did. She was limping, one leg dragging behind her, and her face was pale. At first, he thought he might have imagined it. She wasn't the type to show weakness. She had always been strong, capable, and resilient. But today was different. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. He dropped the tools he was holding and quickly rushed towards her. As he got closer, he could see the blood on her uniform. It was unmistakable red streaks smeared down her blue dress, staining the fabric. His mind raced. What had happened? Who could have hurt her? "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But she didn't respond. She just looked at him with wide, scared eyes. Her usual calm and collected demeanor was completely gone. She was trembling, clearly in pain, but still, she didn't say a word. The rancher gently reached out and helped her sit down on the nearby bench. He could see she was struggling to breathe, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She was in shock, and it was clear that something terrible had happened. But what? He knelt beside her, trying to keep his voice steady. "What happened? Who did this to you?" he asked again, his hands shaking as he touched her wounded leg. She winced, but still didn't speak. The silence between them felt heavy, more suffocating than the thick morning air. There was something unnerving about the way she was acting. The rancher had known her for years, but never had he seen her like this. He had always trusted her. She was the one constant in his otherwise lonely life. And now here she was, hurt and frightened, and he had no idea why. The maid finally looked at him. Her eyes filled with fear. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she pointed towards the distant hills, her finger trembling. The rancher followed her gaze, but all he could see was the usual peaceful view-rolling hills. The barn in the distance, and the quiet landscape dotted didn't make sense. What was she trying to tell him? He glanced back at her, but she had closed her eyes, seemingly too exhausted to continue. For the rancher, this wasn't just a simple injury. Something was terribly wrong. Something dangerous was coming, and it all started with the strange sight of his alien maid limping. The rancher's peaceful world was about to be turned upside down. The rancher sat beside her, unsure of what to do next. The silence between them stretched long, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. His mind raced with questions. Who could have hurt her, and why? She had always been so strong, so independent. This wasn't like her. He looked down at her leg, noticing the deep bruises, the swelling, and the blood seeping through her alien fabric. He could feel his pulse quicken, a knot tightening in his chest. There was no way this was just an accident. He gently touched her arm, trying to get her attention. "Please, tell me what happened," he urged softly. She looked at him, her eyes dull and filled with an unfamiliar fear. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it again, her lips trembling. Her gaze shifted to the horizon, like she was looking for something or someone. "Please," he said again, this time with more urgency. "You don't have to be afraid." For a moment, it felt like she might finally speak, but instead, she turned her head away, her eyes staring out at the empty fields. The rancher followed her gaze, trying to see what she was seeing. The land was peaceful, serene even, but the calm was unsettling now. The rancher had always taken comfort in the solitude of his ranch, but today, the quiet felt suffocating. She slowly raised her hand and pointed toward the hills in the distance, her finger trembling as she did so. She began, her voice barely a whisper. They came from there. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and fear. He was beginning to piece things together, but the truth still felt like a shadow. Just out of reach, her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, he saw something in them that made his stomach churn. "The sheriff's office," she said finally, the words barely audible. "They're not what they seem. They're corrupt. They've been." She paused, unable to finish the thought. The rancher leaned in closer, his breath catching in his throat. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low and full of dread. "The sheriff's office, wasn't that where the law was supposed to come from? How could they be the ones behind this?" Her eyes darted nervously to the barn in the distance, then back to the rancher. "They've been making deals with the wrong people. The good ones, the ones who try to stop them, they disappear. They don't want anyone to know the truth." She looked down at her leg, her face twisted in pain, both physical and emotional. "I didn't want to get involved. I thought I could stay out of it, but they found me." The rancher felt a chill run down his spine. This was no random attack. This was something much bigger. His peaceful life, his quiet ranch, was now part of something far darker. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself, but she could barely keep her eyes open. The rancher's mind raced. He had to protect her. But how could he? He was just a rancher, just a man with a simple life. He wasn't equipped for this. But then, as if something deep within him shifted, he realized he couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not when she had trusted him enough to tell him the truth. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. "I'll figure this out. I won't let them hurt you." She nodded weakly, still too exhausted to speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. The rancher didn't have time to waste. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, and whatever was coming wasn't something he could handle on his own. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let the sheriff's office destroy everything he had worked for. Not now, not ever. The weight of what he was about to do sank into him, but he steeled himself. He had no choice now. The rancher had no idea just how much his life was about to change. The rancher stepped back, his mind spinning with the gravity of what she had just revealed. The sheriff's office, a place he had always trusted, was now the source of his worst fears. As he walked across the yard, he couldn't shake the images of his maid's trembling hands and the terror in her eyes. What had she gotten mixed up in? And why had she kept it from him for so long? He paused, staring at the barn, his thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and dread. The peacefulness of his land, the isolation he had always sought, now felt suffocating. He had always believed the sheriff's office was there to protect them, to keep the peace. But now, he wasn't sure who to trust. His gaze shifted toward the distant hills, the very place she had pointed to. Something was out there, something dangerous. He had to find out what. The rancher had no plan, no strategy, just the overwhelming sense that he had to act fast. He turned toward the kitchen, hoping to find some kind of clue or answer, anything that might explain what he was up against. Inside, the walls of the old ranch house seemed to close in on him. The familiar smell of wood and dust felt strangely out of place now. He rifled through the drawers, pulling out old papers and tools, but nothing that could help him. Then, as his fingers brushed against the back of a shelf, he found it a small, worn box. He hadn't seen it in years. It was something his maid had left behind during her early days at the ranch. He had forgotten about it completely. With a sense of unease, he opened the box. Inside was a collection of old documents, handwritten notes, scribbled maps, and strange symbols. His pulse quickened as he sifted through the papers, trying to make sense of the markings. The rancher wasn't sure what he was looking at, but one thing was clear: these weren't ordinary notes. They were coded. These were messages from the sheriff's office, hidden in plain sight. The rancher squinted at the symbols. Some were familiar, but others were completely alien. As he flipped through the papers, he found a name: Sheriff Zorath. The name sent a shiver down his spine. The sheriff was involved in something far darker than he had ever imagined. His heart raced as he realized that his maid hadn't been just a victim. She had been part of something far bigger, something much more dangerous than he could ever have known. The rancher's hand trembled as he grabbed the nearest map. The symbols on it matched the hills his maid had pointed to. The sheriff's office was involved in something illegal, something that led directly to these hills. He didn't know what it was yet, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't good. His mind raced with possibilities. Whatever had happened to his maid, whatever she had uncovered, it was bigger than just a random attack. The sheriff's office wasn't just corrupt, it was part of a web of deceit, stretching across the galaxy. And now, they knew he was involved. They knew he was connected to the one person who could expose them. With the papers clenched tightly in his hands, the rancher made his decision. He had no choice but to go to the hills. There was no turning back now. He had to face whatever was waiting for him, even if it meant risking everything. The rancher wasn't a hero, but in that moment, he knew that his quiet, peaceful life was over. The stakes were too high. There was no time to waste. As he stepped outside, his heart heavy with the weight of the unknown, the wind carried a sense of impending doom. The rancher knew that whatever awaited him at the hills, it was going to change everything, and the journey ahead would be unlike anything he could ever have imagined. The rancher stood on the porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face, but it did little to calm the storm building inside him. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down, every decision now carrying the potential to change everything. The maid was still in the barn, resting, recovering from her wounds. But she wasn't just any alien maid, she had been part of something bigger, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of their quiet lives. The truth was out there, and now he had no choice but to face it. He grabbed his coat, the fabric worn from years of hard work, and stepped down the porch steps. His boots crunched against the dirt as he made his way toward the hill she had pointed to. Every step he took felt like a step into the unknown, but his determination burned brighter than his fear. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew it was something dangerous. The sheriff's office, once a symbol of order and protection, was now a corrupted force that had twisted the very fabric of the world they lived in. His world. The rancher's mind raced as he walked. The maid's words echoed in his head. They're corrupt. They've been making deals with the wrong people. Those words sent chills down his spine. Who were they working with? What had they done? The sheriff's office wasn't just about law enforcement anymore, it was about power, greed, and control. And now, it was after them. After him. The journey up the hills was long, the terrain rocky and uneven. But the rancher pressed on, every step fueled by the need to uncover the truth. The sun was setting, casting an eerie glow over the landscape, the shadows growing longer with each passing minute. The silence around him was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant call of birds and the sound of his boots on the ground. Finally, he reached the top of the hill, where the view stretched out in all directions, revealing the vast expanse of land below. But it wasn't the view that drew his attention. It was the sight of a small, hidden cabin nestled in the distance. It wasn't much, just a simple structure, half buried in the hillside. But it was exactly where the map had indicated. The rancher's heart began to pound in his chest. This was it. This was the place that held the answers. He approached cautiously, each movement deliberate, his senses heightened. The cabin looked abandoned, but the rancher knew better than to trust appearances. There was something off about it. As he got closer, the door creaked open, and for a split second, he froze, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. But the pull of the mystery was too strong. He stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with dust and the smell of old wood. On the floor, scattered papers lay in disarray, as if someone had left in a hurry. The rancher crouched down, his fingers brushing the papers as he sifted through them. The more he read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a hub, a place where the sheriff's office had been running covert operations, dealing with the darkest elements of the galaxy. But it wasn't just the papers that caught his eye, it was the faint sound of footsteps, approaching from outside. Someone was coming. Panic surged through him, but he quickly composed himself. Hiding behind a stack of crates, hoping to remain unseen, the door opened again, and two figures stepped inside, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. He didn't recognize them, but their presence was enough to send a warning through his mind. They were looking for something, someone, and he was the only one standing in their way. Everything had led to this moment, and now there was no turning back. The rancher had found the truth, but it had come at a cost. He wasn't sure how he was going to get out of this, but one thing was clear: he wasn't alone anymore. and the choices he made in the next few minutes would determine everything. The rancher crouched in the shadows, his breath shallow as he listened to the two figures moving in the cabin. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the rustling of fabric, the low murmur of voices. His heart raced, and his mind raced even faster. Who were they? Were they part of the sheriff's office? Or were they something worse? He had no time to figure it out. He had to act, and quickly. The door was ajar, and through the crack, he could just make out their figures. One of them moved toward the scattered papers on the floor, his boots scuffing against the wood. The rancher held his breath, praying that they wouldn't notice him. He couldn't afford to be discovered now, not when he was so close to finding out everything. The room seemed to close in around him, the air growing thick with tension. The figures spoke in hushed tones, too quiet for the rancher to make out the words, but he could hear enough to understand that they were searching for something or someone. Panic surged through him. Could they be after the maid? Had they tracked him here? The thought of her in danger was enough to make his pulse spike. He had to get out of the cabin and back to her, but he couldn't risk being caught. Not yet. He waited, watching every move they made. The figures moved across the room, their conversation growing louder. As the rancher scanned the area, his eyes landed on a rusted metal door in the back corner of the cabin. It was barely noticeable, hidden beneath a layer of dust and cobwebs. There was something about it that felt important. The rancher's instinct screamed at him to check it out, but the risk of moving too quickly was just too great. Suddenly, one of the figures turned toward the door, his face illuminated by the flickering light from a nearby lamp. The rancher froze, holding his breath as the figure approached the metal door. A wave of dread washed over him. He couldn't let them get to whatever was behind that door. He couldn't risk it, not when he had already come so far. With a surge of adrenaline, the rancher made his move. He darted across the room, moving swiftly and silently, as if he had become part of the shadows himself. His hands shook with the tension, but he kept his focus. He had no choice but to take the risk. Just as the figure reached for the door handle, the rancher lunged forward, knocking a nearby chair to the ground in a deliberate crash. The figure spun around in shock, and the rancher saw his chance. Without hesitation, he charged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The second figure drew a weapon, but the rancher was faster, disarming him with a swift motion and slamming him against the wall. The first figure struggled beneath him, but the rancher was already on top of him, pinning him down with all of his strength. "What are you looking for?" The rancher growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man's eyes widened in fear, and for a moment, the rancher thought he might not get an answer. But then the man spoke, his voice trembling. "The maid. We need her. She knows too much." The rancher's heart skipped a beat. The maid, she had been right all along. They were after her, but why? What did she know that was so dangerous? Before he could ask more questions, the man's eyes darted to the metal door. A cold chill ran down the rancher's spine. Whatever was behind that door, it was important. It was the key to everything. The second figure groaned and stirred, pulling the rancher's attention away for just a moment. That was all it took. The man beneath him broke free, pushing him off with a force the rancher hadn't anticipated. They were both up in a flash, and the tension in the air crackled. There was no more time for words. The rancher moved toward the door, his mind made up. He had to get to it. He had to see what was inside. With a final glance toward the two men, he reached for the handle and pulled the door open. What he found inside would change everything. The door creaked open with a sharp protest, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. The air was thick with dust, the kind that accumulated in places long forgotten. The rancher stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest as he scanned the room. It was surprisingly bare: no furniture, no decorations, just a series of strange, glowing devices lined along the walls. At the far end of the room, a large metallic chest stood in the corner, its surface cold and unwelcoming. The rancher moved cautiously, his boots silent on the cracked floor. Every instinct told him that this was no ordinary room. Whatever lay hidden here had been kept under lock and key for a reason. His eyes darted from the glowing devices to the chest, but it was the chest that held his attention. Something about it seemed important, as if it contained the answers to everything that had let him hear the attacks on his maid. the corruption of the sheriff's office, and the dark secrets that had been buried in the hills. Without hesitation, the rancher approached the chest. His hands trembled as he placed his fingers on the cold metal, the weight of what he was about to uncover pressing down on him. He knew that opening it would change everything. There was no turning back now. With a sharp pull, the chest opened, revealing a collection of data pads, maps, and more of those strange symbols. But it wasn't just the contents that caught his eye. At the bottom of the chest was a thick folder, its edges worn from years of use. The rancher pulled it out, his breath catching as he flipped it open. Inside, he found files, detailed reports, names, dates, and a series of images that sent a chill through his veins. The documents revealed the truth. The sheriff's office had been involved in illegal operations, far beyond what the rancher had ever imagined. The reports detailed a series of covert missions, smuggling operations, and experiments on alien species, all conducted in the name of power and control. But it wasn't just the sheriff's office that was involved. There were others, high-ranking officials, business leaders, even military figures, all part of a vast conspiracy that reached far beyond the borders of the rancher's world. As he sifted through the papers, his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His maid, the one person he trusted, had been caught in the middle of it all. She had been a witness to their operations, a piece of the puzzle they couldn't afford to let go. And now, she was in danger not just from the sheriff's office, but from a network that spanned across the galaxy. The rancher slammed the folder shut, his mind racing. He had to get back to the barn. He had to warn her. But as he turned to leave, a sudden noise from the doorway froze him in place. He wasn't alone anymore. The door had creaked open, and standing in the threshold were two figures, tall, menacing, their silhouettes framed by the dim light. The rancher's pulse quickened. The figures stepped forward, their eyes locked on him with cold precision. There was no time to think, no time for a plan. The rancher didn't hesitate. His body moved before his mind could catch up, and in one swift motion, he grabbed the nearest device from the wall, using it as a makeshift weapon. He wasn't sure if it would work, but he knew he had no choice. The fight for survival had just begun. The rancher's grip tightened around the strange device, its cold surface unfamiliar but solid in his hand. The two figures advanced, their movements calculated, their eyes locked on him with a sense of inevitability. He wasn't sure what they were, but their presence filled the room with a suffocating tension. Every instinct told him to run, to escape, but he couldn't leave. Not with the truth in his hands and the danger of his maid's life hanging in the balance. One of the figures stepped forward, his voice deep and commanding. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his tone heavy with authority. The rancher didn't respond, his mind racing. He needed a way out, some kind of advantage, but all he had was the device in his hand. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the device was more than just a weapon. It felt like it held something far more significant, something that could change everything. Without warning, the rancher lunged toward the two figures, the device held high. The first figure dodged, moving with surprising speed, but the rancher wasn't aiming for him. Instead, he directed the device toward the wall beside them, triggering a burst of energy that sent a blinding flash through the room. The figures staggered back, momentarily blinded, and the rancher seized the opportunity to move. He ran toward the door, his pulse thundering in his ears, but the second figure recovered quickly and moved to block his path. The rancher had no choice but to face him. The device hummed in his hand, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a strange connection to it, as if it had recognized his intentions. The figure reached for his weapon, but the rancher was faster. He swung the device, activating a burst of energy that sent the figure flying back. The room seemed to tremble with the force of the blast, and the rancher barely had time to process what had just happened. The figure crumpled to the floor, motionless. He didn't stop to look back. He couldn't afford to. His thoughts were consumed with one thing: getting back to the barn, to his maid, and making sure she was safe. But as he stepped into the hallway, a low hum filled the air, and the rancher froze. The walls around him began to glow with a strange, eerie light. It wasn't just the devices that had powered up, it was the whole structure. The room he had just escaped from had been a trap, designed to keep intruders from uncovering the truth. And now, the rancher realized, He had triggered something far bigger than he ever imagined. The door to the cabin slammed shut behind him, sealing his escape. A loud, metallic whirring echoed through the walls, and he knew, without a doubt, that he wasn't going to leave this place easily. The rancher gripped the device tighter, his mind racing. He was running out of time. The sheriff's office wasn't just corrupt, it was a machine, a force with endless resources, and he had just set it in motion. There was no going back now. The fight for survival had escalated to a whole new level, and the rancher knew that whatever came next, he would need every ounce of strength, every bit of courage to face it.